Okay, this is the intro to the recording for the Friday night Sabbath Eve Bible study for the 21st day of June 2019. We'll give the Hebrew date when we go live. We'll be streaming live on the Facebook Live Sabbath service page. I know our mic is hot. At least we're not live yet on the main thing. I'll get the mic volume down. Why is that so hot? There we go. That's a little better on the level meter. We'll be streaming a live Facebook Live Sabbath service page, and this recording will go into the archive. We'll begin just as soon as we get a green light from Facebook Live. All right, good evening, brethren, and welcome to this June 19, Friday night Sabbath Eve Bible study. Now, it's June 19 on the pagan Roman calendar. As of sunset on Friday, wherever you are, it became the Sabbath, and it became the 19th day of the third month. We're just almost 2 weeks away from where we had Pentecost this year on June 6th, I think it was. Well, it was the 6th day of the third month. That would have been June 9 on the Roman calendar. I want to wish you all a very happy Sabbath, happy rest from the unrest of the week. And there was a lot of unrest this week. In fact, I was very surprised, and I goofed up and wore the wrong kind of shoes going down a wet post-thunderstorm, still raining a little bit, handicap ramp no less, carrying some feed for my animals. I think that was on Tuesday, maybe Monday, and early this week, and I slipped and had a very bad fall. And for those of you who prayed for me, I want to thank you, because I retwisted my left knee that I had injured last year, and that was an injury that was as if it were a punishment for me, and I understand why. I'm not going to tell you but got let my knee go out while I was at a dance class, overdoing it a little bit maybe, but I didn't twist, fall, or anything like that. It just, in the middle of the dance class, boom, I get this pain in my left knee such that I could not walk on it, and I had to go sit down right away, and God let me suffer that for a good 8 or 10 months, and that was about a year ago. So I'm a couple of months out of God finally letting my knee restore. And then I twist that same knee, and the pain was more immense than what happened last year. Now, I'm sharing this with you for a purpose. And I could just foresee that without God intervening on it, that with the increased amount of pain I had during an actual slip and fall and twisting of the knee, I was just saying, oh boy, if you don't intervene on this for me, which was just a plain, pure accident, dumbness, stupidity on my part for wearing they're water boots. They're for traipsing around in, on wet ground with puddles and even going through creeks in them. But they're not they don't have the kind of soles on the bottom for walking down a ramp that gets wet. They're just going to act like glass, and whoop, sure enough, they did. I had feed in one hand. I grabbed the handrail with the other. Grabbing the handrail while I had the feed only seemed to worsen the thing, because that made me spin around half a turn, and the leg didn't quite turn with me. So I've got half of my body one way and the leg the other way. And then, of course, I went on down and slid down further, and the feed I had went all over the place. It was all, it was laughable in one way. If you'd been watching, it would have been hard not to laugh. Had all this feed flying through the air and everything. But I was in such pain that I didn't scream out when I had the year ago pain come on me during the dance class. I just looked for a place where I could go sit down. Told my dance partner, I've got a pain in my leg, I got to go sit down, and then headed for the benches where I could sit down. But this thing that happened this week, I was in such agony and pain. I screamed out, "Oh God, please help me." Maybe some of you have had a situation like that before. I actually haven't had anything that bad, but it was so bad that if God hadn't have done something for me right there and then, I honestly felt like with that immense pain, and it was in my lower back too, sharp pain in my lower back and hip, I honestly felt like there was just too much stress on the body for me to be able to live through that. I thought, well, I hope, everybody I love will not miss me too bad. But I screamed out to God, "Oh God, please help me." And with the intent in my voice that if you don't, my body is not going to be able to handle this. It will just go into shock, and I'll either just go unconscious or I'll just flat outright die. But he gave me the help. I could feel it coming. And the pain was so immense that even as I felt it coming, I was still in pain. But then I was realizing, hey, for this amount of pain, God is responding to that. I am getting some relief. I will be able to get up in a moment. I don't have to worry about the goat jumping the ramp and coming up and walking all over me, which I had some concern about. If God hadn't got me where I could get up, the next thing you know, my goat would have been trying to come up. "Oh, what's up?" She'd have walked all over me with me laying down. But I was able to get up. Wasn't able to walk too far, but I was able to get back inside the house. And I have a chiropractic chair that my sister gave my parents. And I made my way to that and sat down in it, put my leg in there, turned that thing on my leg, and oh boy, did that feel, relieving. I stayed in that for at least an hour, and then had the wherewithal to make it up the stairs, which I crawled up, by the way, and to my bed. And then that helped a lot. And then I was able, from my bed, with my little Wi-Fi device next to my bed, start emailing some of you, asking you to please do the second part of James 5, send up some prayers for me, asking God to intervene on this. And do you know, I don't know whether it was the next morning, next day, but it was amazing how much relief I was given. I could just see myself. From the time I had the injury last year, I literally had to stay in bed 3 or 4 days, and before I could even get up at all. And I was able to get up the next day. I took cold bath, ice cold bath. I didn't have any ice in the freezer, and the freezer was downstairs in the carport. I wasn't about to do all that traipsing up and down those stairs. I couldn't, really. So I just took an ice-cold bath. I was able to draw some ice-cold type water because of the way the pipes run underground. The cold water gets very cold. And I stayed in that for a couple hours. And with God giving me the relief, I was able to get in there, took a couple of those. And anyway, I've been up and around the last couple of days. But now that's on the heels of not a spiritual fast, but I've been doing a food fast. People call it a water fast, but I think they call it by the wrong name, because we do have a sermon expert by Mr. Armstrong tonight. We'll get to in a moment. But I'm just, while people are maybe tuning in, we were a few minutes late getting on tonight because a lot of my equipment here worked tonight. But all you need is one piece that's not working to mess you up. And Mr. Armstrong often taught us, just check your stuff, be aware Satan tries to intervene anywhere and how he can. And sometimes he'll try to get into a piece of equipment, he's told us. So, you got to pray about everything, literally. So I prayed about it. The equipment that wasn't functioning started functioning. I said, great, okay, so but it cost me about 7-8 minutes. But we're here. Happy Sabbath, everybody. What was I going to tell you about that? I had one of the things I was just going to mention about, I was able to get up for the last couple of days, get around. Oh, but I'm very weak after 5 days of no food but drinking water those 5 days. And it wasn't, as I said, it wasn't for a spiritual reason, because, a fast is a fast of both food and water. Now, there are some people who claim they're doing a spiritual fast and they drink water, not understanding that when you do a real fast, it's a fast of food and water. Even for 40 days, as Moses did twice, and 40 days as Jesus Christ did in the battle with the devil, in the supreme battle for world rulership. That was what was occurring during those 40 days of Jesus Christ fasting here on this earth. And, we all know and are glad to know that Jesus Christ won that battle against the devil, with the devil trying to get him to convert a rock into some bread, which would have been following the devil, submitting to the devil, and Christ said, no, go your way. And he resisted and waited till he could get some food in a way that wasn't submitting to the devil. But I did that for health reasons, to get some toxins out of my body and blah, blah, blah. I've seen where that does you a lot of good, so I thought, I'm going to do that. I started it last weekend, but something came up where I thought, I'm going to have guests, and I better not be doing this water fast. Better have food for everybody. And so I broke it, ate, and then the guesting thing didn't work out, so I had eaten last Sabbath, and I went back to the water fast Sunday, and I'm breaking it tonight, and breaking it very slowly after 5 days of no food, just water. But that's left me weak, even though God healed that leg. There's still a little pain in it. Yeah, he's letting me know, be careful. You need to be careful. Don't wear slippery shoes going down a wet ramp. Dumb. Stephen, dumb on my part, dumb. And so, we can do dumb and foolish things sometimes, and then, we'll wind up paying a price for it. And, all right, but I don't want to say much more about that. There's some people I have had some conversations with that I do want to get back with you. Hope you'll be patient. Some things that we definitely need to be discussing, but with what's been on my table, where I would normally be a little quicker to get back to you, and boom, boom, I'm not able to do that tonight. And Dane, even after speaking with you in California, Dane, who lives in California, after speaking with you this week, I had an emergency I had to deal with this week also, and so I didn't get an opportunity to thoroughly go through the material I have from Tom Williams that I want to go through that relates to Daniel 9, verses 24 through 27. I want to give it to you just like we got it from Mr. Armstrong, and Tom has thrown me a bunch of material, which I'm very thankful for. Tom used to work in letter answering at headquarters, and he took people's questions. I mean, even brethren and non-brethren would write in and, wanting to know this or that, what Mr. Armstrong taught about this or that. where their local minister might not have a clue on every single subject. And so we had people dedicated to covering questions that either brethren, and more so primarily from non-brethren, would write in and ask, and letter answering would give an answer. And if they didn't already have that answer or know the answer, they'd run it through their supervisor, the man who started out as a minister here in Birmingham, Rice. Ray Rice? No, let's see, what's his first name? It's been a long time since I've seen him, and he died about a decade ago. Richard Rice, Mr. Richard Rice. They'd run it through Mr. Richard Rice, and if Mr. Richard Rice did not already have an understanding and answer from Mr. Armstrong, Mr. Rice would say to everybody, hold on, just, hold off on that person. I'm going to Mr. Armstrong about it, and I'll come back and tell you what Mr. Armstrong says. Mr. Richard Rice could do that. He could go direct to Mr. Armstrong. He'd call and say, hey, I need to ask you about a question we need to answer. Mr. Armstrong would say, come on up. Come on right up. And then Mr. Rice would get it direct from Mr. Armstrong, and then he'd go back to the guys that answer the letters for everybody and say, hey, here's the answer to that. And he might even help construct the writing, the paragraphs that are sent out to people. So with Tom's background in that, even though he worked in the Spanish department, he still had to interface with Mr. Rice and the rest of them and say the same thing to the Spanish brethren that the English writers said to the English-speaking brethren. We were all on the same page. We were very fully and dynamically into 1 Corinthians 1 and verse 10 and 11. Let me reach over here and grab behind this thing, let me grab this big print Bible that I like to use, especially when I'm on the live stream here. 1 Corinthians 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 1 I'm going to. This is very important for us, brethren. This is as Christ makes the bride ready for his marriage. Well, I'm sure the Father has a very big part in that too, so I shouldn't just limit it to Christ. As God makes the bride ready for his Son, Jesus Christ, this is one big thing he expects to see and will work on with us, and will cause situations to come up where we'll want and need to focus on that. On 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verses 10 and 11. I'm just about there. It's right after Romans, and then 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. Now I beseech you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing. We're going to talk about that later tonight after Mr. Armstrong speaks about what if you and a brother are speaking different. How do you deal with that? There is a prescribed method for doing that. And if you fail to follow that method, you can cause all kind of not only grief, but discord among brethren, which is one of the 7, 8 things that God says is an abomination to him. And brethren, we have to be careful. If you tell another brother that something that personally offends you, that it's a sin if you do that, and you're not able to answer from the Bible, well, where does the Bible say that's a sin? Then you're sowing discord, because if it's not in the Bible that it's a sin, it's not a sin. Now, but it personally offends me. Well, that's a whole other issue. We do have to try and be careful that we don't offend people. And so if you're going to have a party where you're serving wine and you know somebody is a new believer and they don't believe in drinking wine, they came from a teetotaling Baptist background, for example, and they hadn't quite yet spun around to the fact that, drinking wine is okay. Yeah, well, you get to the Passover, you have to drink wine. What you do if you're having a wine party, you don't invite that person. Real short, sweet, and simple. Or you tell them, look, we're doing something that you're going to find offensive. I don't want you to come. Just, don't come. I have wine shelf here, some fine, outstanding wines. Don't even come over to my house. Because I don't want to offend you. Don't come till you grow up a little bit more. And if you're out there without a job and you're busy all day on Facebook, something's wrong. You need to get off Facebook completely. Spend the whole day out knocking on doors, filling out applications till you're blue in the face until you get a job, because you're not truly keeping the Sabbath unless you do the whole of Matthew 4. I'm sorry, I meant to say commandment. The whole of commandment number 4. And when you read that, it doesn't just say, remember to keep the Sabbath holy. It goes on to say, 6 days shall you work. But the Sabbath day is a day God consecrates as holy, and that day you are to rest. You're not resting from work if you haven't worked the previous 6 days, or at least a good portion of those 6 days that God provides for your work. And if you don't have a job to work and you're not working to get one, you need to get off your duff. And David, no offense there. We got a great friend in Tuscaloosa named David Duff. But that's an expression. That's an old expression. You need to get up off your duff and go out and make a job of getting a job. And come feast time, when you don't have any money for Feast of Tabernacles, if you go somewhere where other brethren are, they say, oh, you don't have money. Well, no, so I just expect you to buy me a meal. And all of y'all, buy me a meal all 7, 8 days of the feast, including the last great day. When you could have gotten up off your duff, gone out, get off of Facebook, have gone out and knocked on doors. Or now you can fill out applications online. And, I've notified some people that don't have jobs that, look, there are openings at Walmart. And you fill out an application online. They have a little quiz for you. The lady at the door said the quiz is so easy. The gal, when I asked where the restroom was, she said, you mean the bathroom? And I paused for a moment. I said, bathroom, restroom, yes, ma'am. Realizing, in a public place, they usually call what you'd call the bathroom at your home, they call it a restroom, because you're not going to go in there and take a bath. You're just going to go in there and relieve yourself. That's a form of rest. And they don't call the room where you take a break when you have your 20-minute break every 4 hours. They don't call that a restroom. They call that a break room, where you go take a break, rest for 20 minutes. But they call what you call a bathroom at home, they call that a restroom in public places, in public stores and restaurants and all that. They call it the restroom, or the men's room, or the ladies' room. There's some alternate terms for it. But the woman acted like she wasn't sure if I meant what she thinks of at home as a bathroom when I asked, where's your restroom? But here's the point of that. The woman told me, I said, well, somebody that I was asking you this question for after I saw your sign out front that said you had openings here. And she explained that to apply, you have to apply online. That's the way they have it. You can come in the store and do it online. They got machines there that go to it, but it's the same thing as online because you're sitting at a computer. And she said right after you fill out the application, then a little quiz comes up. And I said, oh, well, now, is that quiz hard? Because one of the fellows hasn't finished high school yet. She said, that doesn't matter. We hire people here, they haven't finished high school yet. I said, what about the quiz? Is it hard or difficult? She says, I passed it. And I thought for a moment, you're right. When you didn't know the difference, or when you had to question me whether I meant a bathroom when I asked you where the restroom is, I thought, oh yeah, I see what you mean when you say I passed it. She was kind of like saying, I don't know a lot, but I passed that test. Gave me a little chuckle, but I thought, that's great. That's great. An easy test. So, see, you got no excuse if you don't have a job. You're not going, even if you haven't had a job before, there are places that will hire you. I had a job lined up for a couple people over a period of 4 weeks. The boss, when I told him about the people, he said, I'll hire them. Just get them here. I'll hire them 18 hours a week, and they'll do this certain job, and I'll train them in the evening, and they'll work evenings, except Friday. He already agreed, no Friday night work. I'll work them Sunday through Thursday. And they won't have any Sabbath day problems. And I said, well, now, there's also 7 annual holy days with our church. He said, what are they? And I showed him the calendar. I had a little printed calendar. That's a convenience of you getting one of my calendars. I got, on the back, I've got in highlights the annual holy days, so a boss can look at this. It's a Roman calendar with the holy days highlighted purple. A boss can look at this and say, okay, those are the 7 days he has to be off. Hey, I don't see a problem. Yeah, and so he said, okay, get them in here. And so when I talked to the people, they didn't get up off their duff and make, and they really wanted, at that time, they really wanted to leave. I'm not telling you who this is, but they really wanted to leave a situation that they were finding miserable. But they didn't get up off their duff and line up their bus ticket, in which they were going to take a bus and get down here. So then I had to go back to the boss and say, oh, well, listen, they didn't make it. And he was real accommodating. He said, well, how about this date next week? So I said, I'll check with the guys, get back to you. So I tell the guys, and I say, okay, look, you guys, he's changed the date and to next week. So this time, if you want to come and do this, yeah, we do. All right, then line up your bus and come on. So they said, yeah. So I go back to the guy and say, okay, they're lining up a bus. They don't do it. They don't even half try. They don't come. So then the guy said, well, we'll just push it forward. How about the next week? I said, I'll go back to the guys. Same thing repeated the next week. And then one more time, a fourth time, the guy says, well, will they be able to make it next week? And I said, what do you say we get them on the phone and you get a commitment direct from them rather than, me just running it back and forth all the time? He said, that'd be fine. So we call the guys on the phone. The boss there, talked to the guys themselves. But now the guy had told me this is the last time. He says, I've got to have somebody start the training, this, whatever it was, I think a Thursday night, and then they could be off for the weekend, for the Sabbath, but then be back Sunday night again. And so I said, well, let's get them on the phone. We don't want to mess this up again, and I want you to talk to them and let them know, how you've been accommodating to them, but let them know this is the last time you're going to extend the date. They have to be here. So the fellows talked to the men, and they said, yeah, we're coming, blah, 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 we're coming. So they made the commitment to him. He waits, that was about a week before. They wait, I told the guys, be sure this time, line up your bus, make arrangements well ahead of time, be on the bus. You've told the man you're coming. He's expecting you. And don't miss it. Don't mess it up this time. He is not going to extend it again. And they were having a hard time getting a job because they'd been out of work a long time and just various things. And they wouldn't even have to fill out an application. The man just, on my say, and then talk to them on the phone. Just bring them in. I'm going to hire them, train them for this. As long as and it wasn't a hard job at all. And guess what happened, friends? I think you can already guess the story. After 3 times of not getting on the bus, this time they made a halfway effort at it, got halfway to the bus station, or maybe, I can't remember whether they made it all the way to the bus station or not. But they didn't get there early enough to get on the bus. I think they missed it by about an hour. They should have been there an hour earlier, or hour or two earlier, especially after having missed so many times. In a situation like that, they don't arrive till after the bus has already left, or while they were on the way, they realized the time. I don't know. I don't remember exactly, but they missed the bus. And I had to go back very embarrassed after the fellows themselves had committed to the guy and talked to him and tell them I'm sorry, they missed the bus. And he said, well, listen, I'm sorry, I can't extend it again. I'm in desperate need. I got other people wanting this job, and I'm going to start somebody this coming Sunday night. Somebody else, because 4 times they missed. That was the limit with him. He said, I really was accommodating, and he was. And something's wrong, he said. So I had to tell the guys, they were wanting to come on down anyway. I said, look, without a job, don't come right now. I've already prayed about this, and I asked God what I should do if you missed that bus on that 4th time you should be here. And the answer was very clear. That's a sign that they shouldn't come right now. And I said, okay. So I figured, all right, there's some lessons of some kind or something that needs to be learned. And then as we've progressed, things have gotten worse, and amazingly worse since last Sabbath. I saw what this video is going to be about. Just like Satan very much displeased God and shocked him even when Satan rebelled and took 1/3 of the angels that he had very secretively over a period of time gotten each one to agree with the devil that God is unfair. And so you got to watch it when people are saying somebody's unfair, they're wrong, they're evil. They may be working a Satan the devil rebellion against God, against his ministry, or against just another brethren. People do sow discord among brethren against brethren. I've seen a couple boys working from their kitchen do that with people. Even though they do a good thing of loading up Mr. Armstrong's videos on YouTube and Vimeo and other places, they're not the only ones who load up Mr. Armstrong's videos. Others do that. You know, they claim like they got some super special right to it. They get brethren into conversations, and then one brother works you, and then the other brother works you, and you're never sure who you're talking to. Who am I talking to this time? There are 2 brothers. And then they get their dad involved. My dad's coming in to settle this between us. And when I made the mistake of getting in between them and saying, hey, look, I've been noticing how you guys have been beating up on brethren. Do you realize that's sowing discord among brethren? Do you realize that God speaks very disparagingly against accusing brethren wrongly, and explains in his word how that is what the devil does? And you're following the devil when you accuse your brothers wrongly. And these guys were accusing people wrongly. Well, sometimes they'd have some truth to it. They'd find some little thing, and then they would work the guy to blow it. And every word he said that might not be just right, oh boy, they twist it and build on that. Brethren, let's watch this sermon excerpt from Mr. Armstrong tonight on Satan's rebellion and make a commitment. And if you've made this mistake, look, it's 70 times 7. God tells us that when we have a problem with our brother, we're supposed to go to him face to face. I'm actually covering this before Mr. Armstrong speaks, and that's probably fine because you see how it dovetails into what he's speaking. You're supposed to go to him privately, not start putting things out on the internet publicly, or like Satan would do with one at a time. He goes to one angel at a time, who were then angels, and turn them into demons, believing Satan's lie that God is unfair, with Satan working that we only got this earth. We didn't get the whole universe or other parts of the universe. We just got this earth. Look how big the universe is. All we got is this. And God has been very unfair. And the other angels started believing, yeah, God is unfair. He only gave us this. And so he was able, after getting their minds distorted and twisted with that kind of thinking, he was able to lead them to the point where he said, follow me up. We're going to go knock God off his throne for this unfairness. And that's what some of you brethren attempt to do. Let's knock this minister in the face, and knock him off his seat. Well, you better watch out. You're actually working against God when you do that. And when you threaten him with, things like words about being bald, You need to look at 2 Kings, where some kids did that with one of the prophets of old. And we will come back to that. I need to look up the exact verse. And we'll cover that verse at the end where that prophet prayed, and we'll show it to you from the Bible. And God sent 2 she-bears, angry as if they had been robbed of their cubs, and tore 42 rebellious, smart-aleck, smart-mouth kids limb to limb. You may say, what a horrible thing to do to kids. Yeah, but you got to realize how horrible and disrespectful those kids were. God dealt with them in a very mighty way as an example for us, brethren, of things, and young people, of things you should not do against God's elect, and especially against his ministry. And you say, oh yeah, but that minister's wrong. Wait a minute, how? You know, you're creating scripture yourself when you say this or that's a sin, and it's not in the Bible. Yeah, but it personally offends me. Well, that's different. You need to grow up, and you become more emotionally mature and mentally mature, because you're twisting people's words. Even you need to find out, what was the intent behind it when you used this word that offended me? Well, it's not the way you took it. And we'll talk about that more after Mr. Armstrong speaks on Satan's rebellion.
Purpose in human beings being here. Were we put here, or did we just evolve from a spineless amoeba, single-celled amoeba? Where are we going? Is there purpose to life? And what is the way? And let me say here that I bring you absolutely certain hope, a hope that is absolutely sure, and that is that there is coming in this generation, in the generation in which you live, world peace, prosperity, universal prosperity, happiness, brimful and running over, and salvation to mankind.
The World Tomorrow. The Worldwide Church of God presents The World Tomorrow with Herbert W. Armstrong. Ladies and gentlemen, Herbert W. Armstrong.
All you read in the newspapers, all you hear in newscasts is bad news. You hear of the evils of the world, and it seems that there is nothing good. What was the cause? Is there a devil? And if there is a devil, where did he come from? I'm going to answer all of those things, but to answer, let me say it's a good deal like going into a motion picture show, and you go in about 3/4 of the way along in the movie, and you don't know what went before. You didn't see what led up to what you're seeing near the end, and you can't understand it. It doesn't make sense if you don't know what went before. In order to answer the questions that I put to you that are the most important things in this world to know, I must begin at the beginning. And the beginning is not history, it's prehistory. It's before there was any history. It is before Jesus Christ. Now, I suppose that most people would say that the beginning, if you're going to begin at the beginning in the Bible, would be Genesis 1, verse 1. That's the first verse in all the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But that is not the beginning. There is a prehistory considerably, and it might be even millions or billions of years before that, because the number of years, the amount of time, is not revealed at all. And the beginning then is John, the first chapter, and the first 3 verses. In the beginning was the Word, Now that word is translated into the English language from the original Greek. It means the one who speaks and is the spokesman of the Godhead. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, the Word was one personage. That personage was with God, another personage. But that first personage of the Word was also God, and so they are both God. That is the real beginning. And that is before there was any earth. That is actually before there was any such thing as a physical universe. There was no earth, there was no sun, there were no planets, there were no galaxies. All that had come later. The second verse says, the same was in the beginning with God, that is, the spokesman, the Word. All things were made by him, and without him was nothing made that was made. In the 3rd chapter of Ephesians, there's a verse that says, God created all things by and through Jesus Christ. Now, in the 14th verse of this 1st chapter of John, you will read that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. That Word then became Jesus Christ. Now, there is no evidence of any physical universe of any kind at the time. They were just in outer space, if you can think about that. I can understand how this God and the Word, who are alone in space, and no other living creatures of any kind in existence anywhere, and how they must have thought out what to do and planned. And they might have taken millions of years doing it. The amount of time is not revealed at all in the Bible. We don't know. But we do know this, that they created angels first. Angels are made out of spirit. They're not made out of matter. Now, angels were created before the earth. You know, Job was a man who lived long, long ago in most ancient times. And Job apparently had built a great building. And I feel that it is certain that Job was the actual designer and builder of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Job was a man of great ability, great knowledge, great mind. Job was so near perfect that even Satan the devil couldn't find anything wrong with him. Satan is the accuser of God's people, but Satan wanted to accuse Job and had nothing to accuse him of. And Satan argued with God that if you take away from him all he has, then you'll find he'll turn against you and he will begin to commit sin. So God allowed it. Satan took away all of his sons, his children, all of his great vast wealth. He was the wealthiest man in the East, and left just Job and his wife penniless. And still Job did not sin. Satan then came to God and says, well, he says a man will do anything to save his own life. Let me touch him and then see if he doesn't turn against you. And God says, all right, I'll let you touch him, but spare his life. I will not give you any right to take his life. So Satan thought of the most painful thing that he could inflict on Job, short of death, and that was to fill him with boils from head to foot. Then Job's 3 friends came, and they began a discussion. That's what the book of Job is all about. His 3 friends thought that all that happened to Job was Job's own fault, and he'd brought it on himself. And Job insisted on his own righteousness, and that it was not a result of any sins on his part. And in the 38th chapter, it says, then the Eternal answered Job out of a whirlwind and said, verse 4, where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Now this doesn't make sense. If Job had not built a great building, the greatest building on earth, the tallest and highest building until the Woolworth Tower was built down in Wall Street, New York, or just off of Wall Street. So Job had built some great building. Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest, or who hath stretched the line upon it? Talking in the language of one that would build a great master building. Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who hath laid the cornerstone thereof, when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy? In that case, that is long before man was created. Therefore, the sons of God, therefore, are, and all the way from the first chapter of Genesis, referred to as the angels. The angels then were in existence before the earth. They shouted for joy at the completion of the earth. Why did they shout? Because this earth was created to become their abode. Angels occupied this earth before any human man. Now, how many know that? How many ministers, how many evangelists ever tell you that? They don't begin way back there at the beginning. And if you don't get that beginning, you can't understand the present unless you know what has led up to it. Now, God created angels out of spirit, still no matter, until we come to the first chapter of Genesis, which comes next. In the beginning, God created the heavens, and it should be plural, as Moses wrote it in the Hebrew language, and the earth. In other words, God created the earth and the whole universe. But he created angels first. Now he created the physical, material universe. He created it first for the angels. He had a most important job for them to do. That is the way God created the earth. That's the way he created the entire vast universe. He did not finish it. He put angels on the earth, and their job was to finish it. God had a great job for them to do, and that's why they were put on the earth. But now, what is the most important thing that God can create? The most important thing that could be created is something God cannot create directly by fiat at all, and that is holy, righteous, perfect character. If God made the angels so that they had to do just the right perfect thing and never could do anything else, they would be like a machine that does what its maker has intended, but it has no mind, it can't think, there's no character. That isn't what God wanted. So he created the angels with minds. He gave the angels knowledge. He showed the angels his way of living. And when he put them on the earth in order that they would work together in accomplishing his purpose, and this was the trying ground, and if they could succeed in finishing what he wanted finished on this earth, then they would go to the other planets of our solar system, like Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the others. And after they finished our solar system, which is only part of a great galaxy, then they would go to the other planets in our galaxy, and after they finished that, to the other myriad galaxies as far as outer space goes. Now, I'm going to show you that instead of building up and finishing it, they destroyed the earth and tore it down and started wrecking what God had created instead of adding beauty and other things to it. Now, God is the author of beauty. God is the author of light. Satan is the author of chaos, of confusion, and of darkness. But I want to show you a little more about Satan and his origin.
Herbert W. Armstrong will return right after this message.
God put over those angels a super archangel, the most perfect, the most powerful being that God could create. But remember, I told you the one thing God cannot instantly create without taking away the right of free choice, the right of any character whatsoever, is character, holy, righteous, perfect character. And so God did not create the angels with that. God showed them and taught them the right way, but he did not force them to go the right way. They had to make their own decision, even as you and I, and ultimately the whole world will have to, but most of the world is not called to judgment as yet. Now, in the 14th chapter of Isaiah, you begin reading about the king of Babylon, who was a type of sin on the earth, the ancient King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. And then it comes to the 12th verse and speaks of someone not human at all, someone far greater, of whom the king of Babylon was only an earthly servant or type, and so on. He says here, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer?" That's the great antitype. Just as Nebuchadnezzar was the first ruler of an empire, the ruler over the world, so this is someone that was put as ruler over the whole earth in the time of angels. "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer?" His name was Lucifer. The name Lucifer means shining star of the dawn, a light bringer, a bringer of light and truth. Son of the morning. Well, that's another word that even describes the meaning. Son of the morning, light bringer. He had fallen from heaven. "How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?" Or a better translation, "How art thou, who did weaken the nations, cut down to the ground? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God." Now, he had a throne. I want you to notice that. He was a king. He was over the angels. He had a throne. His throne was on the earth because it was under the clouds. He was going to ascend to heaven above the clouds. "I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north." That is the only description in the Bible of the place of the throne of God in the far north. Astronomers find very little in the far north. He continued and said, "I will ascend above the height of the clouds." So he was on the earth. "I will be," it says here, "like the Most High," but a better translation is, "I will become the Most High myself." I'm going to take away the throne from God. I'm going to sit as the ruler myself. "Yet thou shalt be brought down here to hell," which in the Hebrew language and it's Sheol and means the grave. Now I'd like you to turn next to Ezekiel, the 28th chapter, and here again we find something mentioned of him. Now here it starts out talking about the prince of Tyre in the 2nd verse. Then finally it comes to the great antitype that he represented actually. "Moreover, the word of the Eternal came unto me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyre." Now it started out talking about the prince of Tyre, it was the human ruler. Now it talks of the king of Tyre, who is not human. "And say unto him, Thus says the Lord Eternal, Thou sealest up the sum full of wisdom and perfect in beauty." Never can you find a place where God says that of any human man. Perfect in beauty. The only one that it could possibly be said of would be Jesus Christ. "Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God." So he was here on the earth, and that's where his throne was. "Every precious stone was thy covering." And then it goes on to mention many of them. And continuing now in verse 14, "Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth." Now that takes us immediately back to the 24th and 25th chapters of Exodus, where God was revealing to Moses something about the throne of God in heaven. "Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire." Now get this, listen. "Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created." He was not a born being like we are. He was a created being. "And he was perfect in his ways from the day he was created till iniquity was found in him." Now, as I say, if God had made him perfect, so he couldn't do wrong, there would have been no character whatever. God created him with a mind of his own. God showed him the right way. God showed him the way of holy, righteous, perfect character. God set the example in that God had that himself, and this Lucifer could see it. But he had gone the wrong way. Now, he had made that choice himself. He had chosen the wrong kind of character. Now, the next verse here is, by the multitude of thy merchandise, and of course it was the king of the local prince of Tyre, that was the commercial center of the world. They have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned. Therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God, and I will destroy thee, or remove thee is a better word, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Now this great archangel now became no longer Lucifer, the bringer of light and truth, but now the bringer of darkness and a destroyer. Instead of a builder, instead of building up and adding to the earth and making it more glorious and more beautiful, which is the way of God, he now was making it ugly and destroying and tearing it down. Thou wast lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness, and I will cast thee to the ground. Now, in the 12th chapter of the book of Revelation, you will find where John, in his vision, saw him and a third of the angels falling to the ground from heaven when they had tried to ascend up to heaven. Now, this great Lucifer now had led his angels into a rebellion. That left the earth in the condition that we find described back here in Genesis, the 1st chapter, and beginning with the 2nd verse. And the earth was. That word was, as otherwise the Hebrew word is translated became. Because God didn't create it this way, it came to be this way, without form and void. Now, those words that Moses wrote in the Hebrew language were tohu and bohu. It means chaotic, confusion, waste and empty, and it means corruption and degeneration. It is not the way anything could be created, it is the way things become through evil. And so here the earth had come to be in that kind of a condition, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Now we find that the whole earth was covered with water at that time, and it was all dark. Satan had brought darkness where God had put light. Now the first thing then that the Word did, who later became Christ, was to say, let there be light. But I don't want to get ahead of myself again. I'd like to have you turn to the 104th Psalm for just a moment, and the 30th verse, where it says, Thou sendest forth thy Spirit, that is, God sends forth His Spirit. They are created, and God does His creation by the Holy Spirit and through the Word of Christ. In other words, the way God creates, He creates through Christ. Christ is the Word, and He speaks, and it is done. How is it done? The Spirit of God is the power that does it. Now, it says here, Thou sendest forth their Spirit, they are created, and Thou renewest the face of the earth. When did God renew the face of the earth? Back in the 1st chapter of Genesis, you find that. Now, after the angels and all of that, we come back to Genesis 1, and we find that the earth had become chaotic and waste and empty, and darkness covered the surface of it, but it was the surface of water, all ocean, no dry land. And the Spirit of God moved upon the waters. Now, I just read to you how God first sends forth His Spirit, and then Christ speaks, and it is done. And God said, now the word for God, let me go back again. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The word for God there is not the word that means just Christ alone or God the Father alone. The word is Elohim in the Hebrew language, and it is a uniplural that means God the Father and Jesus, who later became the Son by a human birth. Now, they had been put on the earth, and the earth had come to this state of darkness and chaos and confusion. That is the result of what the angels did instead of adding to it and building up. So the angels had failed in their great purpose. Now, decay is not something created. It is the way something becomes as a result of a better creation. And that's what we found there. That's what was on the earth. Now, here is what I want to show you. At that point, it left only God, the one is called God and the one called the Word at that time. This is before Jesus had been born. So it was just God and the Word. And they were the only two beings in the whole universe now that had holy, righteous character, that because they could not ever commit sin. They could be relied on never to go the wrong way. God wanted billions of people who would finish His great creation. God created man then in His own image, in His likeness, but He created man out of flesh, out of matter. God's purpose now to reproduce Himself, the greatest feat that even God could ever accomplish, and that includes bringing us into righteous and holy and perfect character, required man to be made of physical matter. That's why God had created matter, because He foresaw that. It's like a fail-safe plan. Now, what is the one thing uppermost in the mind of God now? He has human beings on the earth, and the thing uppermost in the mind of God is to restore the government of God and the character of God in humans. Now, until you understand all of that background, you can't understand the truth about mankind, beginning with Adam and coming on up to Christ and from there on. And until you understand these things, you don't know why you were born. You don't know why things are like they are on this earth. You don't know what's ahead and how it's all going to come out finally with Christ coming back as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He is already qualified, and He will come back to take over the reins of government of every nation on earth. Actually, Satan has been in charge and has deceived all nations. Now, how he is deceived, that has to come in another program later, which I hope to bring you very soon, and should come 1 week from now. And I will go on and show you what led man into all of the troubles that we have, how we're to be delivered out of them, how God's plan works, what salvation is, why the world is so deceived and doesn't understand the truth of God. You'll have to begin at the beginning. Today I have begun at the beginning, and I have brought you up to the time when God was restoring and recreating the surface of the earth for man. Next time I will begin with the creation of man and what went on from there. So that will be it for this time. Goodbye, friends.
For the free literature offered on this program.
Okay, friends, we have to cut out before they do the announcements that particular cut of the recording. I didn't have those pre-cut out like I do now. So that we've been asked not to show the address. Hey, I've got news from the last 24, 48 hours that I want to share some things with you, some extremely significant things that have happened. Now, I wasn't on with newscast or with a newscast on the World Watch TV program last night because I had to be over on the other side of town taking care of some business. By the way, some of you know that I was going to have a problem. I had some bills due today that I didn't have the money to pay, but I was able. One of my lenders, I've been punctually on time always with everybody that I owe money to, and one of my lenders, I went in and said, I need some more money. They said, how much you need? And I picked a reasonable amount. And they said, They even gave me a few dollars more than I asked for to make the payment thing come out even. And so I walked out of there with a check, put it in my bank last night, and paid my bills today. Boom, on time. So thankfully God provided. He knew I had that need, and he wasn't going to let me mess up. What I'm planning to do, because of the roof, which we got fixed up above us here, I still need to fix the ceiling, so I got a little extra money that not only paid all the bills I had for the month. I paid most of them at the first of the month, but some of them are due late in the month, like now. I paid the bills at the first of the month they were due, and I had no money left to pay these bills with. But like I say, I was able to borrow that, have a little money left over. I can fix the ceiling now that I know the roof is not leaking. I fixed the ceiling once before, and I didn't have the roof completely fixed. So then the roof got messed up even worse than it was. Now I got to fix it a second time. But I have the money to buy the materials to do that, and I'm also going to close in 2 carports that have sheetrock all around the walls, nice ceiling. If I just close in the carports, put doors there, then it adds that area as what they call living space onto the house, and that'll increase the appraisal I get from a reverse mortgage that I'm working on. Yeah, I'm an old geezer, so I'm able to apply for a reverse mortgage. And the higher the appraisal, the greater percentage of money they give to you on the reverse mortgage, and I'll pay off all these crazy bills that I took out for fixing the roof, buying a few pieces of equipment we needed here and other things. And that'll be a nice new relief stage, because some of those loans were like 36%, and each month I pay out my money, mostly if it's going to interest. And the money I take in, I'm not able to use it for anything else. So I get these bills paid off, then my monthly I get 2 checks, one from Social Security, one from military pension. I even have some property I can rent out, so that could be another source of income. So I don't want to I don't want to burden any of you. I'm going to maybe next week give some scriptures on how the Apostle Paul worked without being a burden on anyone. Now, there is 7 times in the year when you are going to hear me remind you you're not to come before God empty. But that doesn't mean if you got some place you're doing that, I give you the reminder, you need to come before God not empty that day. If you want to do it here on those days, great. I do plan on building a building, not like the Pastor Auditorium, just something simple on some land I cut off from the house so that the reverse mortgage wouldn't encumber any more than the house and 1 acre. I gave several acres of land to the church ministry, which is not going to be a Church of God blankety-blank group that anybody can join or feel like they are a member of, because Mr. Armstrong told us we are members of a spiritual organism. That spiritual organism is scattered now. It should not be divided, but unfortunately it is. But I do want to have a little building there on that land, and I have to in order to keep it tax-free. Everything was tax-free because in Alabama, if you're over 65 years old, I'm giving away, if you know I'm getting my Social Security, I'm either 62, 65, or older. You don't have to pay tax on your real estate. But if you subdivide your land like I did, even though I have a homestead, I had a homestead on everything. I paid no tax on any of the real estate. Now that I've subdivided it and gave several acres to the church ministry, the county taxing people say they're going to tax me on that, even though it's in a church name, Church of God Ministry. They're going to tax me on it unless I put a meeting place, a building in which people can meet on it. If I do that, they'll give me the full church exemption, and then I'll be back to not paying tax on real estate, I did that just in case the reverse mortgage people get funny on me. David Duff warned me last week. He preaches over to a little small group not far from here. I went to see him. He warned me about reverse mortgages. You can use it if they claim you can lose your property if they claim you hadn't done the maintenance they require. And of course, you got to keep property insurance on it and your real estate taxes. Of course, you know, if you're older, you don't have to pay the in Alabama, you don't have to pay that part. But they can get funny on you on the maintenance. They can claim, you didn't do enough, and they can foreclose it out. And I figured if push came to shove in the future, you know, you never know how things are going to go. The government would only be able to take the house and the acre. They wouldn't get the rest of the land on which I'd have the meeting hall to keep it tax-free. And that also is an opportunity, because some of you have said, Steve, I want to come here for Feast of Tabernacles. So if we get a building on there before 3 months from now, when the feast rolls around this year on, hang on a second, I'll grab that card. I just dropped it. The Feast of Trumpets this year comes up on September 30, Day of Atonement on October 9, and the Feast of Tabernacles begins October 14, middle of October. We got all the way to the middle of October to see if I can get a meeting hall, God willing, built onto the property. And, you know, even if just a small one, have a small feast here. We got a creek and campgrounds down below at the creek. Would make a wonderful place for people who love to do camping. And we could have nice, small, intimate feast with some people together. I do plan to keep the daily sermons going during the Feast of Tabernacles like I do every year. Not just the holy days, but the days in between as well. And if we had a few people here and we were doing it live from a meeting hall on the property, that'd be hunky-dory, just really excellente. All right, friends, that news I wanted to cover for you. And then, let me cover these couple of scriptures real quick, even though the people who were on here earlier I was hoping would hear this or not, don't seem to be online anymore unless the readout's just not correct. But I told you I'd look up this scripture, and I did, and it's in 2 Kings, 2nd chapter and verse 23. 2 Kings, chapter 2, verse 23. And if you run into any kids anywhere who are being disrespectful of a minister, in some cases, some of the ministry that are compromising things, you know, they may need somebody to speak up to them, but still, being a minister, only 2 or 3 of you should go together and do it very humbly and say, sir, you know, Mr. Armstrong used to teach this and you've changed it. And I expect in some cases where they're haughty and whatever for them to come back and say, well, we have a right to do that, when they really don't. But then you learn to know, well, sir, we can't stay with you anymore because we don't want to compromise. We want to make it into God's kingdom, and God says you can't straddle the fence. You got to be all the way, and all of us speak the same thing as Christ revealed it to us through his end-time apostle, Herbert Armstrong. But these kids that call the prophet, let's see, which one was this? And he went up from thence from Bethel. Now, I have to back up some verses to figure out Elisha. I'll just back up one verse. For 2 Kings 2:22. That makes it very easy to remember, by the way. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 22. It's kind of like 2, 2, 2, 2. 2 Kings, 2nd chapter, 2, 22nd verse, where it mentions that it's Elisha. So the waters were healed unto this day according to the saying of Elisha, which he spoke. And then the next verse, 2:23, explains, as he went up from thence unto Bethel, and as he was going up, by the way, let me go ahead and bring that full forward for you. There came forth little children out of the city. Now, out of the city, where kids tend to be metropolitanized, these little children came up out of the city and mocked Elisha. They mocked him and said unto him, go up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head. That's almost kind of like saying, go up, old baldy. And I actually had the people, the kids that were giving me a hard time this week, make a reference to, what if we called you baldy? I said to him, well, go look up what happened to those kids in 2 Kings 2:23. I don't think you'd be very smart to do that at all. I hope they looked up the verse. because in the next verse, verse 24, look what happened to those kids. And it's the prophet didn't do it. God did it. Look at this. And he turned back and looked on them. He did curse them and cursed them in the name of the Lord. You guys watch out. Don't make me curse you in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 she-bears out of the wood, and tare 42 children of them. Those 2 she-bears that came out of the woods, they ripped to shreds those 42 kids. And let's see what the next verse says. Verse 25, and he went forth from thence to Mount Carmel, and from thence he returned to Samaria. Well, that's all it says about the kids. End of story. End of story. The she-bears came out of the woods and tore up those 42 children of them. Pretty clear that means the bears killed those kids, tore them apart. All right, God expects you young people to have respect for your ministry, for your elders. Today, we don't have any ministers assigned to us. You voluntarily submit to a minister here or there. And when you know the minister is telling it like we were taught, and even when you think in one way he's not, because he did something that offended me, well, you tell him it's that this or that offends me, and then listen to what he says. He may be trying to help you understand. You need to grow up. You need to go get a job. All right, that's all I'm going to say about that. End of story. Did I have another verse? Just this point from 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11, where even that story about Elisha in the Bible with the kids calling him Baldy and he cursing them and God sending 2 she-bears to tear up the kids. Now, all these things, you might say, well, why is that in the Bible? Why is that there? Well, it's for us today. Now, all these things happened unto them for examples, as it says here in King James, Old English, ensamples. It happened to them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. And again, that's from 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. Let me see, is there anything? Wherefore let him that thinks he stands take heed, lest he fall. You guys out there who think you know it all, you got a good verse right here to take a look at, 1 Corinthians 10:12. Let him who thinks he stands take heed, lest he fall. All right, I think that's enough. I think that ending point right there is good to end that on. I want to tell you what happened in the news in the last 24 hours. I wasn't able to cover that last night, as I said. And I didn't want to cover it last night when I got home late either, because at that moment in time, the news story was very questionable. And as Gene Hogberg taught me, Steve, be sure you get multiple sources that are likely to not be using the same source as to how they came up with their story. And I couldn't find any other stories that had any more information than the BBC had on it. None of them had anything that verified from the White House or from the Pentagon what the news stories were reporting, and how they got their news stories that they got last night, I don't know, but it hadn't been confirmed by the White House. So I said, well, this can wait till in the morning. Then I had to pay those bills and take care of a few things today and I was just wiped out. I couldn't get up this morning like I usually do. I got up kind of late. So I just scrapped the news report from last night, and I thought I want to keep watching it anyway. And as of tonight, now I can't show you the pictures because my licensing is for World Watch program. I can't show you everything on Sabbath.tv that I can on World Watch program. But there's a story tonight that says, related to the United States and Iran, quoting Trump as saying the United States military was cocked and loaded to retaliate against Iran having shot down an unmanned drone of the United States, with Iran claiming that the drone was in Iranian territory. When they shot it, the United States claiming no, it was flying over international waters when you shot it down. And of course, the United States has evidence, they've showed it, that Iran was also responsible for 6 oil tanker attacks, 4 several weeks ago, last month, and 2 just last week. But Trump says the U.S. military was cocked and loaded to retaliate, and there's more. Now, Iran did pick up some of the parts of the unmanned drone out of the water, but they could have well gotten those out of the international part of the waters, and they're claiming they were found in the Iran territorial portions of the water. So we don't know who's telling the truth on that, but let me read you a few lines from the news that's just come out tonight on this, or this afternoon on this. President Donald Trump has said the United States military was cocked and loaded to retaliate against Iran. But now here's what was reported last night. He changed his mind before the planned strikes. And tonight reveals that he changed his mind just 10 minutes before the planned strikes. And it's confirmed with the White House, with Mr. Trump confirming it himself. Attacks on 3 sites were planned in response to the shooting down of a U.S. unmanned drone this week. Mr. Trump said he had called off strikes after being told 150 people would die. He tweeted 10 minutes before the strike, "I stopped it, not proportionate to shooting down an unmanned drone." Mr. Trump didn't want to murder those 150 people as a retaliation for the unmanned drone being shot down. The late reversal, the BBC says, was first reported by the New York Times on Thursday night. The newspaper said the operation had been in its early stages when Mr. Trump stood the U.S. military down. "I'm in no hurry," Mr. Trump said on Friday, earlier today. "Our military is rebuilt, new, and ready to go, by far the best in the world." Now, whenever you hear those words from a human leader, we need to be careful, because God says, putting your trust in horses, the horse is a vain thing to trust in for war. I'm well aware from equipment here. Equipment can malfunction. Even your military equipment can malfunction. You can underestimate the enemy and what he has. And Iran is very secretive. And Russia has already stepped in with warnings to the United States to be cautious. And Russia has already announced earlier this year, on March 1, during the President Putin's address to the nation of Russia, his address to the nation in which he showed video and explained that Russia had nuclear missiles with hydrogen bomb warheads on them that could fly so stealthily that no present or future defense system could knock them out of the air before they reached their targets. And he said their targets, they had 130 of them aimed at major United States cities, and they had more missiles aimed at every major military command post in the United States. Now, with that consideration, and the Russia warning the United States, use caution, I'm sure that may have played some part in helping Mr. Trump to say, hey, let's stand this down. Let's not, especially not kill those 150 people. Perhaps he would have gone ahead otherwise and knocked out some facilities if there were no or very few human injuries, and perhaps Russia would have held itself in check even after Mr. Trump had done that much. On Friday, the president told NBC News that he decided not to give the final approval to the planned strikes because of the predicted death toll. Mr. Trump said Iran had downed the drone on Monday of this week, despite an earlier U.S. military statement that the incident happened at 23:45 Greenwich Mean Time on Wednesday, 4:05 Iran time on Thursday. Okay, so there's some conflict and understanding on that. But Mr. Trump, again, earlier today told NBC News that he decided not to give the final approval to the planned strikes because of the predicted death toll. I don't like it. I don't think it was proportionate, he said. President Trump said. Tehran says the unmanned U.S. aircraft entered Iranian space early on Thursday morning. The U.S. maintains it was shot down in international airspace. Tensions have been escalating between the two countries, with the U.S. recently blaming Iran for attacks on oil tankers operating in the region. Iran has announced it will soon exceed international agreed limits on its nuclear program, if it hadn't already anyway. I mean, Iran believes in the Quran. They believe in the, how do you pronounce that word? Taqiyya. They believe in Taqify. They believe in being able to lie to protect your own agenda and beliefs and things. I mean, that's in their Quran. I mean, there's a half a dozen verses. I'll pull those verses up I'll plan to pull them up for the Sunday night World Watch program and share those verses with you there. Okay, let me see. What happened? The report closed down on me. Let me go back to you. There's just a few more things I think would be good to cover. We just have 3 minutes left to go. Let me just give you the highlights on this. I'll cover the very full story with the pictures and the video Sunday night on World Watch. Last year, the BBC says the U.S. unilaterally pulled out of the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran can never have nuclear weapons, Mr. Trump said in his tweets on the aborted strikes, also revealing that increased economic sanctions against Iran were added last night. The U.S. has now asked the United Nations Security Council to meet on Monday, 2 days from today, after the Sabbath, after Sunday, to meet on Monday to discuss Iran. Reuters news agency reports. All right, friends, so we'll be covering more on that. Things are getting high tension. We need, brethren, we have to put away discord. And if there's somebody causing discord, we don't have congregations the way we used to, with ministers over the whole city of a given area, and where if a person who lives there is acting with great disrespect and causing discord among brethren, to help him repent, you disfellowship him. You ask him not to attend. But in some cases where you've got young people that are not yet baptized, who may not have even been yet invited to services until they show some fruits to some degree that they're not going to trouble a local congregation, they wouldn't be invited yet. They'd be told, be sure, get a job, get some work, stop acting like a busybody and hounding and troubling people. Go get a job. And And then you can come and attend to get some maturity under you. And be sure you're not causing fluff and problems. And if you've got emotional, personal problems, well, yeah, seek help with that. Some ministers, I would be glad to help such a person privately. Brethren, we're out of time. So I'm hope that what we covered tonight is edifying for you. And we'll plan to be back here tomorrow morning, 9:30. It'll still be the Sabbath. It'll still be the 19th day of the third month. But because of the Roman calendar not changing their date until midnight, God does it at sunset. They don't change it to midnight. In the morning, it will become the 22nd day of June, Saturday morning. So we'll plan to see you, if God willing, you're going to be with us for that. We begin, or you can watch it in the archive later, but we begin at 9:30 a.m. Central Time, which means 7:30 a.m. on the West Coast. I would encourage those of you there to definitely watch it later. Maybe watch tonight's Bible study in the morning, or one of our news reports from last week that you might have missed. It's a good time on the East Coast, 10:30 a.m. on the East Coast. All right, brethren, I got to say bye-bye. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, your host here, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreath. Happy Sabbath, good Sabbath nights, rest and sleep to you. Till the morning.